The Civil War stemmed from conflicting viewpoints between the northern and southern states. The issue of slavery consumed the country with hatred. Southern states fought to secede from the Union to create a confederation of states with their own constitution that encouraged slavery. On the other hand, northern states fought with their own goal in mind, which was to preserve the Union. President Abraham Lincoln, in a letter to Horace Greeley, once said, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." These opposing opinions caused a major rift between the North and the South. The South's prospering cotton economy was due to their ownership of slaves and forcing slaves to toil away in plantations. The North did not have the same need for slaves because of the steady stream of immigrants flowing in from Europe that were ready to work for low wages. By the 1860s, the burning debate over slavery had risen to the point of no return. A war had unleashed. From 1861 to 1865, the Civil War caused bloodshed, separated families, and took the lives of thousands. Over the course of the war, approximately 620,000 soldiers died due to a number of reasons such as combat, starvation, and disease. The war demanded a lot from American citizens. Everyone had to help, even children. The Civil War is often referred to as the Boys' War because a lot of the people who fought and helped out during the war were young males. The drummer boys were an example of that. During the Civil War, and as with any other war, the battleground was noisy and chaotic. It was difficult for soldiers to hear orders in the midst of disorderly circumstances. In order to make sure that soldiers were receiving the proper commands, they had to have signals that could cut through all of the noise caused by the fighting. Drums played an instrumental role in the Civil War because of this. They were used as a communication device on the battleground to ensure that soldiers followed orders. Orders were conveyed by drum beats, and they delivered messages to soldiers fighting in the war. Despite their young age, many boys were enthusiastic about the war. Boys under the age of 18 would often lie about their age and run away from their homes to enlist in the war. Oftentimes, those that were too young to enlist in the army became drummer boys to help during the Civil War. Drummer boys pulled stretchers to transport wounded soldiers and played the part of assistant surgeons to make themselves useful in saving as many lives as possible. These jobs often required them to go around the battlefield to search for injured soldiers that needed treatment and taking care of dead bodies. Drummer boys were not supposed to engage in combat due to their young ages. However, by simply being on the battleground put their lives at risk. As a precaution, drummer boys were moved towards the back of the battleground away from the front lines, but many boys died due to unexpected attacks. Meet John Clem, a drummer boy during the Civil War. John Clem wrote a piece talking about his journey from the nursery to the battlefield. He talked about his role as a drummer boy in the Civil War. In this piece he mentions,
I was the youngest soldier that served in the Civil War. Almost literally, it might be said that I went from the nursery to the battlefield. Only a few days after the Battle of Chickamauga, I was captured by the enemy, and while a prisoner, I was kept on the march most of the time. General Joe Wheeler, who was in command, took delight in exhibiting to me the women we came across, saying on each occasion with a chuckle, "See to what sore straits the Yankees are driven when they have to send their babies to fight us." At that time, I was barely 12 years of age. I was not 10 years old when, in May 1861, I offered my valuable services as a drummer to Captain McDougall of the 3rd Ohio Regiment of Volunteers, which was on its way to the front. He looked me over, laughed, and said he wasn't enlisting infants. This was at Newark, Ohio, where at the time I was going to school. My mother was dead, and my father had no notion of allowing me to go to the war. Accordingly, I decided to run away. The spirit of adventure had gripped me. It was necessary that the Union should be preserved, and my help was obviously needed. I climbed aboard the train with the men of the 3rd Ohio, got passage in that way as far as Cincinnati, and there I offered myself to the 23rd Michigan Regiment. Again I was rejected, by reason of my age. But this time I was not to be kept from joining by any mere legal obstacle. I went along with the regiment, just as the same as a drummer boy, and though not on the muster roll, drew a soldier's pay of $13 a month. The Civil War was largely a boys' war, one might say. 3 out of every 10 soldiers enlisted on the Union side were under 21 years of age. The minimum age of enlistment, under the law, was 18, but there were thousands much younger than that who managed to get themselves accepted as recruits. I was youngest of all, and decidedly the littlest, being small for my age. Boys, generally speaking, were mighty welcome in the regiments. Their youthful enthusiasm counted for a good deal, and as a rule, they made excellent soldiers. If I had control of the affairs in the time of the war, I would permit, and even encourage, the enlistment of boys. They are good for an army, and for the boys, the training and experience are most valuable.
This piece gives one insight on the life of a drummer boy during the Civil War. John Clem was regarded as a young hero. Another drummer boy during the Civil War was William Bircher.
I have made several attempts to get into the regiment, but not being over 15 years of age and small in size, was rejected. But Captain J.J. Noah of Company K seemed to think I would make a drummer, as the company was in need of one. I was then taken to the office of Mustering Officer Major Nelson, and after being questioned very carefully in regard to my age, was not accepted until I should get the consent of my parents. The importance of the drummer was transmitting orders and also to regulate camp duties and to help with morale. It kinda takes your mind off the arduous task of long-distance marching if you hear something. Another reason particularly, saying the 18th century Revolutionary War period, was that it took your mind off of what was going on if you were on the front line, to hear the music, something else to hear, to kinda divert your attention. It might be something about music calming the savage beast, mixed in with that, and also to give you a little heart. You're out here on the firing line and you hear something that makes you think of home, or makes you think of comrades, or something like that. It might be a little heartening. They also used to intimidate the enemy. Before the actual battle began, it wasn't unusual for your fifes and your drums to march out in front of the regiment and play a tune before they fell with their companies, and maybe intimidate the enemy a little bit. Our band was detailed to the hospital to assist the nurses in taking care of the wounded after the Battle of Chattanooga. It was heartrending to see the poor fellows as they were brought in, shot and mangled in every possible way. Every few moments we would have to take one out who had died and put him in the dead house, where he would remain until there was a wagon load.
During Sherman's 1864 march through Georgia, Williams' regiment lost another drummer.
We lost poor Simmers, the drummer of Company G, during the night. The poor fellow, being unable to keep up, lay down somewhere along the road, and was captured by the Confederates that were following us up. I took his blanket and drum to relieve him, but he was too fatigued to follow, saying, "Oh, let me rest, let me sleep a short time, then I will follow on." I tried to keep him under my eye, but he finally eluded me, and when we again stopped for a short rest, he was not to be found. By that time he was most likely a prisoner. A young kid who had so much patriotism and desire to serve that he might have run away from home, or might have been an orphan and attached himself to a unit, wanting to be a soldier so bad, and this was probably the only way he could do that. I think there's something that grabs all of our emotions, like the kid who gets his wish made, that he becomes a policeman, for a day or something. Those kinds of images we find endearing, and there's a lot less basis in fact for some of them. Not as many as we might think, but they certainly did happen.
Even though William Bircher had to overcome a few obstacles, he was enlisted into war as a drummer boy. Despite being so young, William was awarded the Medal of Honor for running between the lines to rescue his wounded captain in 1895. Orion Howe was another young drummer boy who received a Medal of Honor. Enlisting in the Army at the age of only 13 years old, Orion was the son of the regimental fife major. Orion's Medal of Honor reads,
"Drummer boy, 14 years of age, and severely wounded and exposed to a heavy fire from the enemy. He persistently remained upon the field of battle until he had reported to General W. T. Sherman the necessity of supplying cartridges for the use of troops under command of Colonel Malmborg."
Charlie King was enlisted into the 49th Pennsylvania at age 12 after a company captain heard him practicing his drum near the military camp. He participated in the Peninsula Campaign and was promoted to drum major of the field music for the regiment. During the Battle of Antietam on September 17, 1862, the 49th Pennsylvania suffered a direct hit from Confederate artillery fire in the East Woods, wounding several soldiers, including King. He died 3 days later in a field hospital, the youngest known casualty of the Civil War on either side of the conflict. The following is a quote from what Private Clarkson recalled about the young boy's killing.
"I looked into the face of the comrade who stood at my right, and it looked pale as a ghost. Poor fellow, I thought, you're frightened. I wish you were away from here. A few moments later, he was knocked to the earth with a grape shot and taken to the hospital. Just then, Gus Heller had his feet shot off, and a moment later, Charlie King was shot through the body and fell into a comrade's arms.